Yuvraj Kukar. I have 16 plus years of IT experience in which I have been working in Azure for over 4 years. Today we will learn about Azure virtual machines. Before practically we will create VMs, it's important to understand about the components and design considerations about it. I'll start with the presentation and then we will go in a demo in which we will create a Windows VM and a Linux VM. So any further delay, let's start. So what is Azure VM, right? It's just an overview of an virtual machine. Azure Virtual Machine is one of several types of on-demand scalable computing resources that Azure offers. And Azure VMs gives the flexibility of virtualization without having to buy and maintain the physical hardware that runs on it. However, you still need to maintain the VM by performing tasks such as configuring, patching, and installing the software that runs on it. It's simply an infrastructure as a service where Microsoft manages the actual host, but you just create a VMs on top of that. It's very easy to spin up a VM, but at the same time, it is important to understand the design considerations for production environment. So let's discuss about the design considerations, which means what do I need to think about before creating a VM? So first, the name of your resources, right? You need to plan for it. You need to plan the naming convention, what naming convention you want to give for your VM, for your application, for the resources such as resource group in which you will create the VM. Second is the location where the resources are stored. So usually the region is called location. For a VM, the location specifies where the virtual hard disks are stored. There are 60 plus regions and 140 countries where Azure existence is. However, not every region supports a type of a hard disk, which we will discuss in this demo, in this presentation. Um, so you need to plan for it. You need to see, what type of VM you want to create, what type of disk you want to use, and in which regions that is available. Next is the size of a VM. So we'll discuss the sizing in my next slide in detail, but there are like multiple options such as general purpose or a compute optimized. You need to decide on the size. What size of VM do you need for your work, for your task, if it is test or it is production. So there are different multiple options and the pricing is based upon that. Next is the operating system that the VM runs. Azure support multiple VMs, not like Linux, Windows. Even Windows and Linux has like multiple options to select from, and you need to plan for it. You need to plan, what host on what operating system you want to deploy on the VM. Next is the configuration of the VM after it starts. It's straightforward. You need to know the configuration, right? You need to know how much memory you need to allocate. You need to know how much hard disk you need to allocate. You need to know if you need one data disk, encryption, etc., and the related resources that the VM needs. Last but not least, the limit. So as per Microsoft, the maximum number of VMs that can be created is 20 virtual machines per region and a maximum of 10,000 in a subscription. That's the default limit. As you know, this is a soft limit. This can be increased by submitting a ticket to Microsoft, but that's a default limit. So let's talk about the VM sizing and pricing. The size of a VM that you use is determined by the workload that you want to run. The size you choose that determine factors such as processing power, memory, and the storage capacity. Azure offers a wide variety of sizes to support many type of users. To start with general purpose. So general purpose basically is balanced CPU to memory ratio. It's ideal for testing and development, or I could say small to medium databases. It covers B and D series of VM. That is also there's also A series, which is like for dev purposes, but B and D series comes in the general purposes. Next is compute optimized. It's which means it is high CPU to memory ratio. So for medium traffic, like to the web servers, it generally required a compute optimized VM. Under the compute optimized, the series which Microsoft give is the F series of VM. Next is the memory optimized. Memory optimized, as name says, is a high memory to CPU ratio. It's great for relational database servers. It's good for medium to large cache if you need, and it covers E series and some VMs from the D series. Next is a storage optimized. Storage optimized basically has high disk throughput and IOPS. High disk throughputs and IOPS cover LSV series. And next is a high performance compute, which is H series of VMs. I think it would be useful if I show you the list of VMs so you can go in detail and read about it. So on my screen, I'm changing my tab to the Microsoft article in which Microsoft provides the size of virtual machines in Azure. As we briefly discussed about general purpose, covers B and D series of VM, is balanced to memory, CPU to memory ratio, ideal for testing and development, same as compute optimized, which covered FSV2, high memory to CPU ratio. Then now you need to decide upon which application you need to run on VM. As an example, if I need to make this VM as a domain controller, I prefer to use FSV2 series, in which I have high CPU to memory ratio. However, if I have a requirement for running a database on this, so probably I would look for memory optimized to storage optimized. So this kind of decision you need to take based upon what it provides, and different series have different pricing. Of course, general purpose, which is like balanced CPU to memory, ideal for testing and development, should have prices little lesser than the compute optimized or a memory optimized. If I click on this link, you will see the details of each of this. And if I go to D series in here, DSV2 and DV2 series, it again has further information upon what kind of sizing is there, how many vCPUs you need, how many memory you need, how much storage you need. Um, I uh, again, I mean, if you are looking for a high workload like storage, I prefer to look through, throughput and IOPS. So now, what throughput and IOPS, does? IOPS is input output processing, which means how fast it basically do the read queries and write queries, and then throughput is how fast it reads from the operating system. So those are the decisions you need to take when you plan to decide upon the size of the VM. Of course, price does matter. You need to understand, like, what's your average price you want to pay. So there are various options you can look around in the list of VMs available from Microsoft. All right, I'm going back to my presentation, which is somewhere here. Sorry. Okay, sorry for that. All right, in my next slide, I'll talk about disks and images. So there are two type of disk. One is managed disk and one is unmanaged disk. Unmanaged disk, as the name suggests, it's not managed by Microsoft, by Azure, I would say, in which you need to create your own storage and you manage. You take the backups, you take care of the whole storage. However, managed disk is simply you just create the size, you choose the size, you create it, and then rest Microsoft take care of it. Now, what's the difference actually in this? So managed disk, if we talk about, Microsoft is handling the storage on your behalf. You don't need to create storage accounts for virtual machine disk anymore. Managed disks are designed for 99.999% availability. Managed disks achieve this by providing you with three replicas of data, allowing for high durability. The available type of disk in under managed or unmanaged are ultra disk, premium solid state disk, standard solid state disk, and standard hard disk. There are differences in disk again with IOPS and throughputs. IOPS, as we just discussed, IOPS basically the time taken for storage account to perform input output operations per second from start to finish. It manages the number of read write operations per second, while throughput is just a transfer speed. So when I checked, I found like in under managed disk, all four options are available. However, under unmanaged disk, I just found premium and standard hard disk drive option. So encryption is also a key decision, I would say, because managed disk provide you, the option of encryption. Um, There are two different kinds of encryption. The first is server-side encryption, which is performed by the storage service. The second one is Azure Disk Encryption, which you can enable on the OS and data disk for your VMs. So let's go in little detail, like what is server-side encryption actually is. So server-side encryption provide encryption at rest, which means your data is safeguarded in the storage. Server-side encryption is enabled by default for all the managed disk, snapshot, and images in all the regions where managed disks are enabled. However, the Azure Disk Encryption allow you to encrypt the data and the OS used by infrastructure as a service virtual machine. For Windows, the drives are encrypted by using industry standard BitLocker encryption. For Linux, the disks are encrypted using DMCrypt technology. The encryption process is integrated with Azure Key Vault. It's another component which we'll discuss later to allow you the control and manage the disk encryption keys. Next is caching. For all operating system disk in the memory, caching is done by default. You don't need to enable it, right? Read write cache is enabled for OS disk, and I'll show you when we do the demo. It is better to move them in a data disk where the default cache is turned off. When you need to be very selected on, turning on the cache, some application like SQL where it helps in reading the query faster, you enable read cache, but it increases the throughput of the disk as well, right? And you need a premium disk for that. For read write, it's kind of dangerous, I would say, to use because it writes data in the cache and only commits by the application which properly handles writing cache data to a persistent disk. If VM crash, the data could be lost. So now let me ask you, if you have, logs, one on a disk, if you have a logs and on a disk you have, other data, which cache would you choose? So for me, I would not choose any cache for logs because I'm just, writing the logs in there. However, I would choose the cache on the data where my application has to read and it will help read faster. So next, when we'll choose the high availability, we'll see these options when we create the VMs. That is availability set, availability zone, and virtual machines scale set. I'll not go in detail in this, at least in this video, but in my other video, I will, describe this in detail. But I'll tell you what is availability set. So ability set is nothing but a logical grouping capability of isolating VM resources from each other. When they are deployed in the same data center, there is no cost of the ability set itself. So you only pay for each VM instance that you create. It's recommended that two or more VMs are created with an availability set to provide the high availability application and to meet the 99.95 Azure SLA. Now next is Azure Zones. Same as ability set, zones basically allow you to deploy your VMs into two different data centers within the same region. Ability zone is physically separate zone within an Azure. There are three ability zones per supported Azure region. Please check, ability zone option is not available in every region. Only the regions which have three data centers, Microsoft allows this option to choose when you create the VM. Next is virtual machine scale set. Virtual machine scale set allows or set, lets you create and manage a group of identical load balanced virtual machines. So number of virtual machines instance can be automatically increase or decrease in response to demand or a defined schedule. Last but not least is the service level agreement. Microsoft provide 99.99 service level agreement as well as 99.95 in different cases and different scenarios. So let's read about 99.99 first. For any virtual machine that have two or more instances deployed across two or more availability zones, which we just discussed, in the same Azure region, Microsoft guarantees at least 99.99% of the time. For any single instance virtual machine using premium SSD or a ultra disk for all operating system disk and a data disk, Microsoft guarantee of 99.9% SLA. Now, there's 99.95% of SLA for the virtual machines that have two or more instances deployed in the same availability set, right? Or they have a dedicated host group, which we have not discussed, but dedicated host group means it's not your VM will not be created with a bunch of other machines. You will get your dedicated host. You need to create a host group and then you can choose the host. But of course, the pricing is different. It's expensive. Okay, without further delay, let's jump on to demo. This is the end of the presentation.